Welcome everyone, I'm Shadow Rider, and today we will focus our attention on Moon Tea, Marriage, and Madness. This is the second lore video within our series on the Tourney, the upcoming plot for Sansa Stark or Elaine Stone. In the previous video, we discussed the general external politics, but in this video we'll look thoroughly into one specific event, or to be precise, a series of events. This is the story of a boy, a sister, and her father. But before we start, there will be extremely minor spoilers for the books. If you care about these minor details getting spoiled, don't watch this video. Having had all that out of the way, I hope you enjoy. To start, we'll go back to the betrothal of Catelyn Tully to Brandon Stark. To celebrate their betrothal, Hoster Tully held a feast. There, Littlefinger tried to kiss Catelyn, but obviously she rejected him, and he got completely drunk. What happened that night, though, is more of a mystery. So these are the facts. 1. Littlefinger tells the small council he bedded Lysa Tully. 2. Littlefinger believed he bedded Catelyn Tully that night. 3. Lysa tells Littlefinger she bedded him that night. 4. Lysa tells her father she bedded Littlefinger. 5. According to Lysa, he called her cat. And 6. Lysa did not bed Littlefinger. Ever. The most obvious conclusion here is that Lysa impersonated her sister to be able to bed Littlefinger. This is a conclusion that, from what I found, everyone agrees with. This explains point 2, 4, 5, and 6. If Lysa impersonated her sister, it stands to reason that Littlefinger would believe it was Catelyn, and he would call her cat. This also explains why Lysa told her father it was Littlefinger, because it actually was Littlefinger, and how Littlefinger could believe all that without ever actually having bedded Catelyn. Perfect explanation, right? Well, this does not necessarily explain point 1 and 3. Let's first look at 3. Lysa tells Littlefinger she bedded him. To be precise, she says she gave him her maidenhead, and this got her pregnant. This happens right before she gets pushed out the moon door. The best explanation for this is that this specific bedding happened at another time, say after he attempted to fight Brandon Stark. This is the assumption that, for example, the Wiki of Ice and Fire makes. We know, though, that this assumption is false. She specifically said that Littlefinger took her maidenhead, and from a few pages before that, we know exactly when that happened. At the feast. And thus the time when he got her pregnant must also be at the feast. There is one problem here, though. She tells this to Littlefinger, to the man she raped by impersonating his true love. I cannot imagine how this must have been for Littlefinger. Just imagine her telling him, you know that moment when you thought your true love expressed their love for you? That moment from which you probably draw all your hope that you might be able to be with her again? You know that moment that probably motivated you for the past 15-ish years? Probably the most important moment in your life, which turned you into the psychopath you are? Yeah, that moment. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's all a lie. It wasn't actually Catelyn in your bed that night. It was me. I'm sorry I raped you impersonating someone else, giving you the false hope of the life you dream of. Can you forgive me? To be honest, if I was Littlefinger and I heard that, I would literally fall down and cry. Or I would throw the woman who said that down a moon door. Works as well. We'll return to this moment in another video, but for now it's important to know that they probably only slept once before Lysa's marriage. There is another argument to be made that they didn't sleep more than once. Littlefinger at the time was not Littlefinger yet. He was not the calculating player of the Game of Thrones we know today. He was just a young boy who was in love. It would be really weird if he would ever sleep with Lysa, because that simply does not fit within his character as we see him at the time. Now that we've established they slept only once, how could point 1 be possible? Well, Littlefinger tells this to the small council before he leaves for the Vale in a storm of swords. There are 2 options here. Either A, Littlefinger lied, which seems quite possible because no one would be able to fact check the matter, or B, Littlefinger slept with Lysa during her time in King's Landing. Either of these are really realistic and wouldn't cause any problems for this video, but we'll get back to it in another video. But one time was enough, because Lysa got pregnant. Now this causes complications. Obviously, Lysa had to tell someone, and in the end she told her father, Hoster Tully, hoping he'd accept her baby. Now if she told him immediately after she got pregnant, it wouldn't have been a big deal. She would have just gotten the moon tea or any other abortion drug, and all would have been fine. We've seen it work before, and we have no reason to assume it wouldn't work. There were 3 problems, though. Firstly, if she told her father immediately, the baby could just be removed without trouble. She really wanted to keep the baby, so she probably waited as long as possible before telling him. This means that the baby was probably quite old, which would explain why the abortion with the Muti almost killed her. If the baby was, say, 3 months old, the abortion would obviously hurt a lot. To be honest, I don't expect the abortion of a 3-month-old baby would even be possible without it killing her. I think the most likely option of what actually happened is that Hoster Tully forced a miscarriage on his daughter. The Munti would then kill the child during or just before childbirth with the hope that his daughter would survive. This would explain the fact that Lysa is still alive and that she has some type of abortion and that she almost died. Secondly, she probably didn't want to tell her father immediately, because he would probably be quite mad at Littlefinger if he found out. She probably wanted to wait as long as possible before she would pull him into the trouble. If she slept only once, which is quite likely, Littlefinger didn't know it was Lysa who slept with him. For obvious reasons, she wouldn't want to involve him if at all possible. Because Littlefinger seemed to believe that he slept with Catelyn during Game of Thrones, he wasn't involved, and thus he was probably already sent away from Riverrun before Lysa told her father. This means that it took quite a while for Lysa to announce her pregnancy. Thirdly, Lysa believed that she was pregnant. If she was early enough in her pregnancy that the fetus wouldn't be big enough to be felt, then the Munti probably wouldn't have killed her. But she was far enough into her pregnancy where she could feel herself being pregnant. Thus, an abortion wouldn't be possible anymore. So once again, the evidence points to the fact that this was probably a forced miscarriage or something of the sort. Though, of course, you could explain this by saying Lysa was simply delusional. Maybe it was a phantom pregnancy of sorts, where she thought she was pregnant though actually she couldn't have known yet. There is one more thing of interest. She says the child was a boy. This would indicate that she was pregnant enough to recognize which sex the child was. Or, of course, it could just be misogyny. It would just be her wishful thinking. She really wanted a boy, so she assumed the child would be a boy, even without having any evidence to back up that claim. You could say that's way too irrational, but then you probably haven't met enough people. Humans are inherently irrational, and if she's crazy enough to rape someone while impersonating her sister, she is probably crazy enough to believe the child would be a boy, even without having any evidence. But let's take some steps backward in time and analyze Littlefinger's duel. At the time he was 14. He believed that Catelyn truly loved him because he thought that she'd slept with him. Then Brandon Stark comes along and announces their marriage. Littlefinger probably believed that Catelyn should be his true love and all that, so he challenged him to a duel. I can imagine Littlefinger believing him to be a protagonist of a song, who has to fight to his last breath to defend his true love from others who try to steal her away from him. So that's what he did. Even though he was a terrible fighter and Brandon was around 5 years older, he fought and he fought and he fought, only getting more and more beat up. And he did not yield. Brandon offered him many chances, and yet Littlefinger fought on, as the stories say you should. And in the end, Littlefinger was beaten by being knocked unconscious by Brandon. To me, this explanation of the fights fits really nicely. If he really believed that Catelyn loved him, that would explain why he went so far to quote-unquote protect her. This also fits within the more naive picture of Littlefinger at the time. He wasn't the calculating, rational persona we see today. He was just a boy in love. If he already was calculating, he would never have fought Brandon, and yet he did. Now let's take a look at everything Hoster Tully has done, because he's probably the most active character within this story. When Catelyn sees him in A Clash of Kings, he believes she's actually Lysa, and he tries to excuse the following actions. Firstly, he gave her the Munti, which killed her child of the person she loved. Secondly, he almost killed her by giving her the Munti. Thirdly, he married her to Jon Arryn instead of the person she loved. The fact that these are the most important things he has to say indicate that she was probably mad at him about these things when she left Riverrun. Now, there are important things to keep in mind, but we'll get back to this. And first, the marriage. We hear that Jon Arryn wanted a wife who would give him children. By now, he is 2 wives down and he still has 0 heirs. And luckily for him, Hoster Tully wanted to marry his daughter to someone who would accept it if he married a wife who had lost her maidenhood outside of marriage. In that day and age, it was of course unacceptable to have sex outside of marriage, so he needed to find someone who had the honor to stay silent. And who better than his honorable new war ally, Jon Arryn. So, Hoster Tully hastily organized the marriage between Jon Arryn and Lysa Tully. It happened at the same day as the marriage of Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully. After the marriage, Catelyn noted that she and Lysa were getting pregnant together. According to Catelyn, they were both impregnated at the wedding, and they both went through their pregnancies together. Though Catelyn actually got a child, Robb Stark, Lysa wasn't so lucky, and her child died stillborn. Catelyn says that before the marriage she was happy and excited to be pregnant, though after a miscarriage, Lysa didn't want to hold Catelyn's child. This causes a huge problem. If she had already gone through a miscarriage or an abortion, which almost cost her life, she shouldn't be happy and excited to be pregnant. She should be terrified. And yet she isn't. She's only terrified after her miscarriage of Jon Arryn's child. But first, another big problem. Catelyn didn't know Lysa was pregnant with Littlefinger's child, and she did not know about the abortion or the forced miscarriage or whatever happened with Lysa which almost cost her life. This causes problems for my theory that she was late into pregnancy when the abortion happened, because Catelyn, as her sister, should have noticed her pregnancy. And even if Lysa wasn't into her pregnancy, she still almost died. Catelyn should have known about her sister's near-death experience whenever it would have happened. And this is simply impossible with our theory. Unless it isn't, because there is a second explanation. An explanation that answers both of these problems. Lysa's child by Littlefinger and Lysa's child by Jon Arryn are the same child. What? Let me explain. To do this, we need to look forward a bit. During Robert's rebellion, Catelyn Stark remained at Riverrun until the war was over and her child was somewhere around 6 months old. We know that Catelyn chose her child to Lysa, who would need to be at Riverrun at the time. So, we know that they were going through their pregnancies together, and that they were together after the pregnancies, which makes it extremely likely that Lysa was also at Riverrun during the entire war. Using this, we can conclude that if the feast happened some weeks before the marriage, it would be possible that the pregnancy Catelyn sees Lysa go through wasn't actually because of the marriage, but actually thanks to Littlefinger. This would mean that she hasn't gone through a miscarriage yet, and thus would still be excited and happy with her pregnancy, especially because she believed that the pregnancy was actually thanks to the love of her life. This would also explain how Catelyn could have missed her sister's near-death experience. She didn't. She was there at her miscarriage. Even though this explains these specific problems, we still have to answer some things. What about Hoster Tully? He tells us he married Lysa off because she was quote-unquote soiled, which means he must have known about the pregnancy before the marriage, and thus he probably aborted her before the marriage. But Catelyn doesn't remember anything of the sorts, so we can conclude that he didn't abort her, or at least Lysa's near-death experience did not happen before the marriage, and thus it is quite likely that the near-death experience was actually the miscarriage that Catelyn saw. This means that, for some or other reason, Hoster Tully gave the Moonty after the marriage, so Lysa's first child did not survive childbirth. And that is a problem. Why would Hoster Tully give the Moonty after she was already married to Jon Arryn? I don't see the problem with her getting a child then, because she's already married. Let's ignore that for now and put it on a timeline. So, to go from beginning to end. The feast, Lysa gets pregnant. She tells Hoster Tully and he does nothing. The hastily organized marriage happened to hide Lysa's pregnancy, and because she's already pregnant, she doesn't become pregnant to Jon Arryn. The Tully sisters have their pregnancies together. Hoster Tully gives Lysa the Moonty, which causes Lysa to have a miscarriage. This timeline is okay. There is the slight problem that Hoster Tully doesn't give the Moonty after he hears of Lysa's pregnancy, but that is not the biggest problem. If you look at it, this doesn't work. At all. For this timeline to work, the time between the feast and the marriage has to be no more than, let's be really generous, 2 months. She has to hide these weeks of pregnancy, and this is the maximum of time that I can reasonably give her. Now, to avoid getting into timeline stuff, look in the description. This is entirely impossible. The minimal amount of time is 4 months, which means that Lysa shouldn't have been able to hide it. Conclusion, this theory is impossible. Theory broken. Myth busted. So, is there no explanation that explains all these problems? Is this really an unsolvable mystery within the lore of A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, that seems to be the case, right? Wrong, because today I present to you a theory that answers everything we've brought up, a theory that I can find nowhere else on the internet. Welcome everyone to my ultimate theory. Let's do this. So, to start at the very beginning, the feast. As established, Lysa impersonates Catelyn and rapes Littlefinger. Sometime later, Littlefinger has a duel where he doesn't yield because he's a young, ignorant boy. Then, when she believes her pregnancy is so far that the Moontie couldn't stop it, Lysa tells her father that she's pregnant with Littlefinger's child. Here comes the big change. This is where he gives her the Moontie. This is far enough into the pregnancy where Moontie wouldn't work, so he gives her a lot of Moontie and hopes for the best. She might get sick to this, but this is not her near-death experience. To hide the fact that she had lost her maidenhood, he proposed a marriage to Jon Arryn, and a while later that marriage happened. This is where she actually gets pregnant. Then, 9 months later, she has her miscarriage. This seems perfect. We do have to explain some points though. Firstly, Lysa. Lysa is delusional, we all know that. I believe that Lysa, with purely wishful thinking, concluded that she was pregnant with Littlefinger's child. Because, to be real, she had no way of knowing if she was pregnant with Littlefinger's child, so it would be really too late. If she was actually pregnant, I don't think so. It would fit with this theory she wasn't, but it doesn't actually matter. Either way, when she was given the Moontie, whatever child there was gone. Though she probably didn't want to believe that her only chance with Littlefinger's child was gone. Then, when she actually does get pregnant, thanks to Jon Arryn, she believes that it was Littlefinger's child. Even though any rational person could conclude that this would be completely impossible, she couldn't. People believe what they want to believe. In this case, that meant that she believed that the child was actually Littlefinger. This would explain why she was so ecstatic to be pregnant. She believed that finally, after many months of waiting, Littlefinger's child had come. Sadly, this child dies in childbirth, identifiable as a boy. This is her near-death experience. This is where she almost dies. Lysa, being the delusional girl she is, completely breaks down. The child she has been waiting for probably around a year was dead, and there was nothing she could do. No mental gymnastics would be enough to avoid the truth. She didn't want to hold her sister's son, and she probably fled to the Vale immediately. But most importantly, she blamed her father. According to her, the child was dead. Not because of bad luck or any rational reasons. No, because her father killed it when he gave her the Moontie. Let's put ourselves in her shoes. First, she gets pregnant, but her father gives her some drug which lengthens the pregnancy, and probably damaged the child in some way. Luckily for her, she still gives birth, but the child dies in childbirth. The obvious conclusion here is that the child died because of the drug he gave her. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was Hoster Tully, I would feel pretty bad. Even though you would know that what she was saying was completely impossible, you could see how devastated she was, and you'd probably feel sorry for her. So, when you're dying and you have the opportunity to see her again, of course you would try to excuse your actions, even though you actually did nothing wrong. Of course you would say sorry for giving her the Moontie. Of course you would say sorry for giving her away to Jon Arryn, instead of letting her live her life with Littlefinger. Of course you would say sorry for causing her almost to die, even though you had nothing to do with it. She blames you, and that is all that matters. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, trying to find the perfect theory that explains everything. And I think that I have found it. It just fits so fantastically, and I love it. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like. If you didn't enjoy the video, feel free to leave a dislike. If you don't agree with me, feel free to prove me wrong in the comments. If you want to see more, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for watching my video. Have a great day.